Springtime, 2015. 10 years ago, on a day very much like this, most people would be enjoying traditional spring activities. Be going for a ride with family, reading a book on the porch, maybe even a walk along the beach. But one man was planning a very different type of activity. He was planning murder. That man, Isaac Perlmutter. He was the president of an obscure company called Marvel Comics, a company that apparently produced stories about beloved fictional characters like Slapstick and Fool Killer. But this time, he was plotting the death of 4 of his characters, a supposed Fantastic Four, you might say. And that murder would go through. This is that story. Thank you for joining me here on 49 Hours. Why 49? Because unlike those other crime shows that will kick the can down the road, make sure that the cold case shows take over, we give one more hour to investigating the true story of what happened. Join me, won't you, as we investigate why Marvel Comics would cancel the Fantastic Four. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Folks, today I'm going to talk to you about the Fantastic Four, and the episode's going to be a little different. This is story time. I'm going to be talking to you a little more casually. Most of the time my episodes are an analysis about the techniques that a writer or artist uses, their history, maybe the history of a comic or a specific aspect of comics. But we're going to talk about a behind-the-scenes story about Fantastic Four, and it starts in the mid-2010s, when Marvel Comics made the controversial decision to cancel Fantastic Four. Why controversial? Because it had been running monthly since its inception in 1961. Silver Age. Marvel launches Fantastic Four, and that represents the beginning of the shared Marvel superhero universe that we recognize today. Retroactively, they pulled characters from the Golden Age, but that really is the beginning of a reset and just this creative onslaught from Jack Kirby, writer Stan Lee, other people like Steve Ditko, super important, because there were so many characters, Spider-Man, X-Men, Hulk, Avengers, Thor. But Fantastic Four is the first. And it had been running monthly until 2015, when they canceled it. Why did Marvel cancel it? There was speculation at the time. The speculation was that Marvel was upset with the fact that they didn't have the film rights, that the film rights for Fantastic Four were at 20th Century Fox. Because by 2015, they were doing pretty well with movies. They'd started with Iron Man in 2008, had a lot of success. One of their biggest properties was actually X-Men. That was also at Fox. X-Men was too big to cancel. Fantastic Four? Sales weren't so good. But that is just a key part of Marvel history. And you can always boost sales, folks, just to be clear, by putting a new creative team on it. Spending some money, putting a big name on it, do a little bit of a reset. You can always do that. Instead, they decided to cancel it. So I'm going to talk to you today about the corporate rivalries, the strategic decisions that were made behind the scenes, the underlying motivations. It's a complex look at the eventual return of the Fantastic Four. We're going to look at the perspectives of some key executives and try to provide some insight into this complex interplay between companies. Companies become bigger than creators. So it's important to know, how did Marvel get here? In the 1990s, they were facing a lot of problems financially, and it culminated in a 1996 bankruptcy. To stabilize their finances, Marvel sold off the film rights to most of its characters. Spider-Man ended up at Sony, Fantastic Four, which is what we're talking about today, as well as X-Men. Those went to 20th Century Fox. And then some of the other random pieces ended up at places like New Line, who knows where. Superhero movies started to become pretty big. Blade, and then the X-Men at the very tail end of the 90s. And then going into the 2000s, it would just continue to grow with stuff like Spider-Man, big success. Finally, Marvel's like, let's reclaim some of our rights And we'll try to do movies with our, at the time, let's be honest, our B characters. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, they've all been boosted in profile at the same time. They're not Spider-Man and Wolverine. The rights to Fantastic Four specifically are actually even more confusing. They had first sold the rights, Marvel had, back in like '86 to a small company called Constantine Films. And to keep those rights, they had done a quickie 1994 movie where they sub-licensed the rights to Roger Corman. But now they'd sold all the rights to some of their bigger characters. They were selling well. So Constantine Films sub-licensed those to 20th Century Fox, who eventually acquired them. And they started releasing their own live-action Fantastic Four movies. 2005's Fantastic Four, there was 2007 sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, both directed by a guy named Tim Story. Critically and financially, they were not exceptional. You'd be hard-pressed for somebody to say, that is my favorite superhero movie. And at the same time, people will go, well, there was a lot worse produced at the time, you know? It wasn't something on the level of Elektra. It was financially successful enough that 20th Century Fox was going to retain the rights. We put those together, and I think that they made right around $635 million worldwide. They received mixed reviews, but $635, based on the budgets that they had, it was reasonable. 20th Century Fox was making money. 2015, if they didn't produce a movie, they'd lose the rights. Marvel thought that they might have a chance at getting the rights back if Fox couldn't get something working. And Fox kind of rushed out a new reboot. That was the Fantastic Four movie directed by Josh Trank. And that thing grossed about $165 million worldwide on at least a $120 million budget. When you factor in marketing costs and the cut that movie theaters get, that's a box office bomb. 20th Century Fox lost a lot of money on that. It was a pretty bad movie. I remember I was stuck on a long airplane ride, and you can choose movies to watch, and I'd watched a couple, and then I was like, fine, I'll give Fantastic Four a chance. And I was so bored by it, I gave up right around the third act when they were finally going to battle Doctor Doom. I was just like, I just don't care. So I've never even finished that one. Fox showed no interest in selling or releasing those rights. That was around the same time, keep in mind, 2015, that Marvel was coming up with a creative partnership with Sony so that they could share Spider-Man, and Spider-Man could be in their MCU live-action films. They couldn't get Fantastic Four, even though there wasn't a good Fantastic Four movie coming out. Very frustrating for Marvel, especially apparently frustrating for their then CEO, a guy named Isaac Perlmutter, who is one of my least favorite executives who's been part of Marvel. I don't think he's ever really cared too much about comics, and he's never really had any good creative ideas. You know, Marvel had been in that bankruptcy, right? Part of them coming out of that was being bought by Toy Biz, which was run by two guys, Isaac Perlmutter and Avi Arad. It was almost at first toy and movie first, and then the comics could support that stuff. So the comics were sort of hit and miss. You know, they'd hire sometimes some really good talent and get some great comics, and other books kind of got neglected. And I'll be honest, sometimes Fantastic Four got a little neglected. I would say that, you know, the 60s run by Kirby and Stan Lee, it's fantastic. Holds up really well. Sometimes it's a little goofy early on, but it introduces so many cool concepts. Galactus, Silver Surfer, Inhumans, Negative Zone. It just keeps introducing new worlds, new themes, new sci-fi ideas. Made some really likable characters. You know, they were a family. The Fantastic Four were a family, and they were scientists. That always kept them a little bit different than just your average superhero that goes out patrolling. But no movie had quite cracked that yet. So how do we get to the cancellation? End of 2014, Isaac Perlmutter is apparently really miffed that 20th Century Fox is not going to work with them. And he says, cancel it. He's like, why give the movies additional stories and material? It's not selling that well. It was in like the top hundreds of comics sold. Final issue ends up being number 645, somewhat ironically titled Fantastic Forever. And that came out April 2015. Last Fantastic Four comic. It's a big deal. Fantastic Four was one of their longest running titles. And it was weird. It was really weird to just see them sort of cancel it. And they, just keep in mind, I'm giving you information of what we know now and what people were speculating on, but Marvel didn't like release a statement saying this is why we're ending the comic or anything like that. They just said we're canceling it. Really important historically, that comic. In terms of what it introduced to the MCU, how it developed Reed Richards, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, Sue Storm, and all of their amazing supporting cast and villains, Doctor Doom, Franklin Richards, just so many great characters. I love Fantastic Four. Now, there were reports from industry insiders, right? Was it ever confirmed? No. But, outlets like Bleeding Cool would suggest that it was a direct order from Ike Perlmutter, and he was frustrated, But we didn't know. Other reports were saying things like Fantastic Four licensees weren't able to use the Fantastic Four as much. Marvel was legit cutting off how much Fantastic Four they were going to put out into the world to choke the movie franchise. Which, let's face it, that's a little bit of a weird idea when you've got a book that's already been running for over 50 years. There's a lot of material to mine there. I don't think that it's going to affect them that much to stop for a few years. It just isn't. Let's talk about the sales and that context. Fantastic Four started off super strong title. That's why it was still running. There'd been some creative highs. I think that the John Byrne run in the 80s, pretty long run, that was a good one. I think that the Walt Simonson run in the 90s, it's not the longest, but it's very different, quirky, it's cool. And then as the 2010s began, Jonathan Hickman began a pretty acclaimed run that introduced a lot of interesting concepts like the Future Foundation, which was to train the next generation of scientists. But it turned the Fantastic Four into sort of mentors for new scientists and new ideas. Or the Council of Reeds, this idea of an interdimensional, multiversal group of Reed Richards that would put together their big brains to solve problems. And we realized that our Reed Richards won't go as far as they will because he has more of a moral center. And that's what makes him special. He won't go to the scientific extremes that some of the other Reeds are willing to push things. So there were some good runs, but like sales, they were starting to wane. They were not anywhere near what like Spider-Man and X-Men are. Those are the perennial bestsellers for Marvel, that and event stuff. Marvel justified their cancellation to the extent that they did. It wasn't selling that great. In story, to be fair, they got a good send-off. They got a great send-off in some ways. They were such an important part of Marvel's event Secret Wars. Not the 1984 one, Marvel's Secret Wars, the 2015 Secret Wars that Jonathan Hickman had been building up to with some ideas from his original Fantastic Four run, but really he'd been writing 2 consecutive Avengers titles for about 2 years, building up this threat of multiversal collisions and stuff like that, like really big, scary stuff that could wipe out, the whole universe, okay? But they built up to it, and at the center of it was Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. And when it all, I'm trying not to spoil it necessarily, but when all the dust settled, the Fantastic Four basically said, you know what, we're going to go off and sort of explore and leave Earth behind for a little while. You're like, oh, okay. So they were sort of written out. Tom Brevoort, one of Marvel's most tenured employees. Currently, he's the executive editor of the X-Men books, but he's had editorial roles across a wide variety of Marvel projects. He responded to fan speculation about the film rights. Brevoort said, aye, you guys with your magic mind-reading helmets. He wouldn't confirm and he wouldn't deny fan speculation at this point that Marvel canceled it because of the movies and then the arguments there. It's interesting that he won't even deny it though, Anyway, we cut to much more recent, and Jonathan Hickman had written Fantastic Four from 2009 to 2012. He explicitly confirmed the rumors. He said, quote, I think it's pretty common knowledge at this point that Marvel isn't publishing Fantastic Four because of their disagreement with Fox. While it bums me out, I completely understand because, well, it's not like they're not acting out of cause. Fox needs to do a better job there. So there we have it. They couldn't cancel X-Men because it sold too well, right? And the licensing and stuff like that, Marvel gets a lot of money from that. They couldn't cut off X-Men, really. They were already cutting their nose to spite their face with Fantastic Four. Canceling X-Men and all the licensing stuff, that would just be like shooting yourself in both hands and both feet. There was a directive not to introduce any new characters.
I have to say, quite honestly, as I understand it now, the X department is forbidden to create new characters. Because all new characters become the film property of Fox.
That's why they would do things like they killed off Wolverine and they brought in an Old Man Logan variant from the future. It felt new, but really it isn't in a way, you know? They weren't introducing lots of new characters there. There might have been one or two smaller supporting characters, but they were like retreading a lot of the same ground with X-Men at the time. So how does it come back? Fantastic Four is absent from Marvel publishing from April of 2015, when their title's canceled, all the way to August of 2018. And the hiatus ended because of a whole series of corporate decisions. Walt Disney Studios ends up buying Marvel's parent company. Okay, like they buy Marvel essentially. December 2017. Well, in 2017, they ended up buying 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox, like Fox decided to separate itself out with TV, film, etc., and they sold off their film company, their film and TV stuff. Eventually, Disney bought it. That meant that all of a sudden, Disney now had the rights to Fox properties like Predator and Aliens and Simpsons, and they got back the rights to things like X-Men and Fantastic Four. Well, now there's no reason to keep the book canceled. That was really sudden. I don't think anyone could have predicted that Fox would have done that they would have sold themselves. None, and even if they did, that Disney would end up being the highest bidder for them. You know, like there was no way to really predict anything like that would happen, but it was a big deal. So August 2018, Fantastic Four comes back. Dan Slott is the writer. Dan Slott's at this point been writing for Marvel for quite a while. He's got an interesting story in and of his own right. I've got an episode about his Superior Spider-Man run, and that talks a little bit about his history. I recommend that. I like Dan Slott. The fact is, his books do sell well. Sometimes some of his ideas have been controversial. Usually they've been proven to be right and very successful, especially with Spider-Man. People were like upset about all sorts of changes he made on Spider-Man, but he wrote that book for a really long time, and it sold well. Sarah Pichelli was the artist when Fantastic Four came back, and she's fantastic. She'd had a lot of success with Marvel introducing Miles Morales as the new Spider-Man in their sort of Ultimate books. Not sort of, in their Ultimate books. So a big team. It was a big relaunch. Fans were happy. The exact sales figures by 2018, much harder to come by. Distributors stopped sharing the exact information. So it's a little more nebulous. But it doesn't seem like it did bad at all, because it's never stopped since. And, you know, Marvel's about to launch their own movie as I record this. You also started to see Fantastic Four popping up in their licensed stuff a bit more. All of a sudden, you know, Fantastic Four action figures and clothes, much more common. For a few years, nope, not much, but now they're back. So did executives have anything to say? Well, you're not going to get anything out of Isaac Perlmutter. He's pretty much a hermit. He does not go out in public too much. You can find one or two photos of him with Trump. He supports the president. But he basically keeps to himself. He does not do any press. Tom Brevoort, had been a little cagey. He sort of hinted at something. Jonathan Hickman's podcast interview, that was like the most confirmation that we've honestly ever got, but nobody's ever tried to correct him. So it seems like, you know, he was telling the truth. It finally came out. Everyone's like, yeah, that's the case. Was Fox, anybody on the Fox side of things, did they say anything? No. But you know what? Fox at that time was having trouble producing a good movie version of Fantastic Four, 2015's movie, not cutting it. And obviously, their whole studio was about to get sold. So the executives there were focused on different things. Stan Lee did have a comment. Stan Lee, Marvel's father, right? That's how he's thought of. He said something along the lines of, and this was 2015, right, when the book was canceled. I think he was asked at a convention, but I've got this quote. He goes, "We should have all of our characters under Marvel. Remind me on my way home to do something about that. We'll do our best." Did Kevin Feige say anything? He's the guy that oversees all the movies as the executive producer. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, he revealed, yeah, Marvel is definitely working on Fantastic Four. And now we cut to 2025. It's finally coming out. It's a big deal. Fantastic Four is a key cornerstone of the comics. It just is. It's their sci-fi nook, but they're just such unique characters. You know, being friends, family, and scientists. They're so much different than somebody that goes out patrolling for crime. What are the implications of this? The cancellation of Fantastic Four was a really rare example of a comic book publisher using its publishing strategy to influence a film studio, or at least attempting to. I can't think of another time when the comics have tried to influence the movies so directly. And it was, of course, behind the scenes as compared to what they were putting on the page. But that was a pretty bold strategy at the time, to cut off the content. You know, it affected the comics availability and the merchandise. So Fantastic Four was not in the public eye too much for a few years. That meant that they lost a little bit of their cultural cachet, to what extent they had it. It also meant that they were set up for a bigger reboot or reintroduction than some superheroes get. Did it affect the 2015 movie at all? No, not really. It was all coming out at the same time. Did it affect 20th Century Fox? Maybe on some small level. You know, they may have slowed down what they were going to do for another attempt at a Fantastic Four movie. They definitely weren't going to make a sequel, so they'd have to reboot it a third time, which is kind of a lot. And there were no newer ideas, so it might have affected it on some small level. Fans were pretty critical of the move because they wanted Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four can be great. I'll tell you right now that the current run that's been going on for just over 2 years by writer Ryan North is one of its all-time best. Top three Fantastic Four runs. Just great. Episodic. 1, maybe 2 issues. Tells great sci-fi mystery stories. Focuses usually on only 1 to 2 characters at a time, usually. Does do team stuff, don't get me wrong. But it'll use some of them as more supporting characters and focus on developing the characters. Great run. Strongly recommended by me. Hickman said that Marvel's decisions to cancel the comic ran contrary to all of his creative instincts. And I agree. It just highlights the extent, though, to which corporate interests can shape a creative product. You know, it is a business. I think we all acknowledge that. But it is a business of storytelling, which at its core is a business of art. And when art and commerce meet, strange things happen. Strange things happen, that's for sure. Fantastic Four returned in 2018. It got the film rights back to Marvel. And now we've got this Fantastic Four First Steps movie by Matt Shakman coming out. I hope it's good. I hope it leads to Fantastic Four becoming even bigger than it is right now. But at the end of the day, I'm certainly happy the comic is back because, like I say, the Ryan North written run is incredible. It's literally fantastic. Very, very cool. The cancellation, weird story. I just wanted to share it with you. I hope you found it interesting. And I'd be curious to hear if you can tell me in the comments below, is there another example of a comic book company making a decision to affect something external to itself? Because I can't really think of any other big ones that are on this level. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back real soon with a traditional episode doing a deep dive into a creator. Until then, your marching orders are keep reading comics. Folks, thank you so much for staying and watching this. Thank you to my amazing patrons for supporting me and making this show possible. Just so you know, if you join Patreon at just $2 or any of the levels above, you do get an exclusive Comic Tropes episode every month, and you even get to vote on what it will be. I give you some topics, you get to vote, I make an episode just for you, and it's a little similar to what I'm doing right now. So if that interests you, just a little more content, that's pretty easy. If you can't afford that, I'd certainly appreciate the likes and subscribes. Part of why I did this Storytime episode, as well as last week's more of a top 10 list, it's not always what I do. It's a little less work for me on editing. And right now I'm dealing with some severe shoulder issues. My right arm is very weak and in incredible pain all the time. It's something called adhesive capsulitis, if you want to look it up. It's painful is all that matters. So even like using the mouse and typing and stuff, I can do it. It really hurts. So I'm trying to put out some content that doesn't require quite as much editing. I hope you can understand that. I want to keep talking about comics and giving you as much as I can. Here's hoping the movie came out all right. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I do recommend the Ryan North comics. You know what? As long as I'm talking about it, I'll leave you with this. What's your favorite run on Fantastic Four? Is it Kirby Lee? Is it John Byrne? Is it Walt Simonson? Is it Ryan North? Is it Jonathan Hickman? Is it Dan Slott? Is it, Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco? I don't know. You tell me. I'd love to know your favorite run on Fantastic Four. Thanks, everybody. Bye.